A Molotov cocktail, also known as a petrol bomb, poor man's grenade, firebomb or just Molotov, is a generic name used for a variety of bottle-based improvised incendiary weapons. Due to the relative ease of production, they are frequently used by street criminals, protesters and non-professionally equipped fighters in riots, gang warfare, and urban guerrilla warfare. They are primarily intended to set targets ablaze rather than instantly obliterate them. Name: the name, Molotov Cocktail, was coined by the Finns during the Winter War. The name is an insulting reference to Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov, who was responsible for the setting of spheres of interest in Eastern Europe under the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in August 1939. The pact with the Nazis bearing Molotov's name was widely mocked by the Finns, as was much of the propaganda Molotov produced to accompany the pact, including his declaration on Soviet state radio that bombing missions over Finland were actually airborne humanitarian food deliveries for their starving neighbors. The Finns sarcastically dubbed the Soviet cluster bombs Molotov breadbaskets, in reference to Molotov's propaganda broadcasts. When the handheld bottle firebomb was developed to attack Soviet tanks, the Finns called it the Molotov Cocktail, as a drink to go with the food. Molotov himself despised the name, particularly as the term became ubiquitous. Recipe: a Molotov cocktail is a breakable glass bottle containing a flammable substance such as petrol or a napalm-like mixture, with some motor oil added, and usually a source of ignition such as a burning cloth wick held in place by the bottle's stopper. The wick is usually soaked in alcohol or kerosene, rather than petrol. In action, the wick is lit and the bottle hurled at a target such as a vehicle or fortification. When the bottle smashes on impact, the ensuing cloud of petrol droplets and vapor ignites, causing an immediate fireball followed by spreading flames as the remainder of the fuel is consumed. Another method is to place a reactive substance in with the petrol, and treat the label or wrapper paper with another chemical. When the bottle ruptures, the two chemicals mix and ignite. This is safer to handle if done properly, and does not harm the thrower with a visible flame prior to the throw. A far superior version can be produced by substituting carbon disulfide for the petrol and saturating this solvent with white phosphorus and sulfur. The mixture will automatically ignite on exposure to air. Other flammable liquids such as diesel fuel, methanol, turpentine, jet fuel, isopropyl alcohol and E85 have been used in place of, or combined with petrol. Thickening agents such as solvents, foam polystyrene, baking soda, petroleum jelly, tar, strips of tire tubing, nitrocellulose, XPS foam, motor oil, rubber cement, detergent and dish soap have been added to help the burning liquid adhere to the target and create clouds of thick, choking smoke. Explosive liquids, such as nitroglycerin or nitromethane, were sometimes also added to the mixture to create a more potent, damaging explosion, increasing its blast radius and lethality. Other chemicals can also be added to create noxious gases on the resulting cloud of smoke, causing people to suffocate upon exposure to the smoke, giving an effect similar to tear gas. Development and use in war. Spanish Civil War improvised incendiary devices were used for the first time in the Spanish Civil War between July 1936 and April 1939, before they became known as Molotov cocktails. In 1936, General Francisco Franco ordered Spanish nationalist forces to use the weapon against Soviet T-26 tanks supporting the Spanish Republicans in a failed assault on the nationalist stronghold of Cesena, near Toledo, 40 kilometers south of Madrid. After that, both sides used simple petrol bombs or petrol-soaked blankets with some success. Tom Wintringham, a veteran of the International Brigades, later publicized his recommended method of using them. We made use of petrol bombs, roughly as follows. Take a 2-pound glass jam jar. Fill with petrol. Take a heavy curtain, half a blanket, or some other heavy material. Wrap this over the mouth of the jar, tie it round the neck with string. Leave the ends of the material hanging free. When you want to use it, have somebody standing by with a light, i.e., a source of ignition. Put a corner of the material down in front of you. Turn the bottle over so that petrol soaks out round the mouth of the bottle and drips onto this corner of the material. Turn the bottle right way up again. Hold it in your right hand, most of the blanket bunched beneath the bottle. With your left hand, take the blanket near the corner that is wetted with petrol. Wait for your tank. When near enough, your pal, or comrade in arms, lights the petrol-soaked corner of the blanket. Throw the bottle and blanket as soon as this corner is flaring. See that it drops in front of the tank. The blanket should catch in the tracks or in a cogwheel, or wind itself round an axle. The bottle will smash, but the petrol should soak the blanket well enough to make a really healthy fire which will burn the rubber wheels on which the tank track runs. Set fire to the carburetor or frizzle the crew. Do not play with these things. They are highly dangerous. Kar-Kingol. The Battle of Kar-Kingol, a border conflict of 1939 ostensibly between Mongolia and Manchukuo, saw heavy fighting between Japanese and Soviet forces. Short of anti-tank equipment, Japanese infantry attacked Soviet tanks with gasoline-filled bottles. Japanese infantrymen claimed that several hundred Soviet tanks had been destroyed this way, though Soviet loss records do not support this assessment. Finland. On 30 November 1939, the Soviet Union tried to invade Finland, starting what came to be known as the Winter War. The Finnish army faced large numbers of Red Army tanks. Being short on anti-tank guns, they improvised incendiary devices to use against them. The Finns perfected the design and tactical use of the petrol bomb. The fuel for the Molotov cocktail was refined to a slightly sticky mixture of gasoline, kerosene, tar, and potassium chlorate. Further refinements included the attachment of windproof matches or a phial of chemicals that would ignite on breakage, thereby removing the need to pre-ignite the bottle, and leaving the bottle about 1/3 empty was found to make breaking more likely, as the cooling system was almost invariably placed where direct fire wouldn't hit it. The target of choice was the rear deck of a tank. The burning contents of the bottle would pour through the large cooling grills and ignite fuel, hydraulic fluids and ammunition. A British War Office report dated June 1940 noted that the Finns' policy was to allow the Russian tanks to penetrate their defences, even inducing them to do so by canalizing them through gaps and concentrating their small arms fire on the infantry following them. The tanks that penetrated were taken on by gunfire in the open and by small parties of men armed with explosive charges and petrol bombs in the forests and villages. The essence of the policy was the separation of the AFBs from the infantry, as once on their own the tank has many blind spots and once brought to a stop can be disposed of at leisure. Molotov cocktails were eventually mass-produced by the Alco Corporation at its Rajamaki distillery, bundled with matches to light them. Production totaled 450,000 during the Winter War. The original recipe of the Molotov cocktail was a mixture of ethanol, tar and gasoline in a 750 ml bottle. The bottle had 2 long pyrotechnic storm matches attached to either side. Before use, one or both of the matches was lit. When the bottle broke on impact, the mixture ignited. The storm matches were found to be safer to use than a burning rag on the mouth of the bottle. Britain. Early in 1940, with the prospect of immediate invasion, the possibilities of the petrol bomb gripped the imagination of the British public. For the layman, the petrol bomb had the benefit of using entirely familiar and available materials, and they were quickly improvised in large numbers, with the intention of using them against enemy tanks. When used in the right way and in sufficient numbers, the Finns had found that they were effective. Although the experience of the Spanish Civil War received more publicity, the more sophisticated petroleum warfare tactics of the Finns were not lost on British commanders. In his 5 June address to LDV leaders, General Ironside said, "I want to develop this thing they developed in Finland, called the Molotov Cocktail, a bottle filled with resin, petrol and tar which if thrown on top of a tank will ignite, and if you throw half a dozen or more on it you have them cooked. It is quite an effective thing. If you can use your ingenuity, I give you a picture of a road block with 2 houses close to the block overlooking it. There are many villages like that. Out of the top windows is the place to drop these things on the tank as it passes the block. It may only stop it for 2 minutes there, but it will be quite effective." Wintringham advised that a tank that was isolated from supporting infantry was potentially vulnerable to men who had the required determination and cunning to get close. Rifles or even a shotgun would be sufficient to persuade the crew to close all the hatches. And then the view from the tank is very limited. A turret-mounted machine gun has a very slow traverse and cannot hope to fend off attackers coming from all directions. Once sufficiently close, it is possible to hide where the tank's gunner cannot see. The most dangerous distance away from a tank is 200 yards. The safest distance is 6 inches. Petrol bombs will soon produce a pall of blinding smoke, and a well-placed explosive package or even a stout iron bar in the tracks can immobilize the vehicle, leaving it at the mercy of further petrol bombs, which will suffocate the engine and possibly the crew, or an explosive charge or anti-tank mine. By August 1940, the War Office produced training instructions for the creation and use of Molotov cocktails. The instructions suggested scoring the bottles vertically with a diamond to ensure breakage and providing fuel-soaked rag, windproof matches or a length of cinema film as a source of ignition. On 29 July 1940, manufacturers Albright and Wilson of Oldbury demonstrated to the RAF how their white phosphorus could be used to ignite incendiary bombs. The demonstration involved throwing glass bottles containing a mixture of petrol and phosphorus at pieces of wood and into a hut. On breaking, the phosphorus was exposed to the air and spontaneously ignited. The petrol also burned, resulting in a fierce fire. Because of safety concerns, the RAF was not interested in white phosphorus as a source of ignition, but the idea of a self-igniting petrol bomb took hold. Initially known as an AW bomb, it was officially named the No. 76 grenade, but more commonly known as the SIP grenade. The perfected list of ingredients was white phosphorus, benzene, water and a 2-inch strip of raw rubber, all in a half-pint bottle sealed with a crown stopper. Over time, the rubber would slowly dissolve, making the contents slightly sticky, and the mixture would separate into 2 layers. This was intentional, and the grenade should not be shaken to mix the layers, as this would only delay ignition. When thrown against a hard surface, the glass would shatter and the contents would instantly ignite, liberating choking fumes of phosphorus pentoxide and sulfur dioxide as well as producing a great deal of heat. Strict instructions were issued to store the grenades safely, preferably underwater and certainly never in a house. Mainly issued to the Home Guard as an anti-tank weapon, it was produced in vast numbers. By August 1941, well over 6 million had been manufactured. However, there were voices that were more cautious. There were many who were skeptical about the efficacy of Molotov cocktails and SIPs grenades against the more modern German tanks. Weapon designer Stuart McRae witnessed a trial of the SIPs grenade at Farnborough. There was some concern that, if the tank drivers could not pull up quickly enough and hop out, they were likely to be frizzled to death. But after looking at the bottles they said they would be happy to take a chance. The drivers were proved right. Trials on modern British tanks confirmed that Molotov and SIP grenades caused the occupants of the tanks no inconvenience whatsoever. Wintringham, though enthusiastic about improvised weapons, cautioned against a reliance on petrol bombs and repeatedly emphasised the importance of using explosive charges. Other fronts during the Irish War of Independence. The Irish Republican Army sometimes used sods of turf soaked in paraffin oil to attack British Army barracks. Fencing wire was pushed through the sod to make a throwing handle. The Polish Home Army developed a version which ignited on impact without the need of a wick. Ignition was caused by a reaction between concentrated sulfuric acid mixed with the fuel and a mixture of potassium chlorate and sugar, which was crystallized from solution onto a rag attached to the bottle. The United States Marine Corps developed a version during World War II that used a tube of nitric acid and a lump of metallic sodium to ignite a mixture of petrol and diesel fuel. Modern use. During the Second Battle of Fallujah in 2004, U.S. Marines employed Molotov cocktails made with 1 part liquid laundry detergent, 2 parts gas for burning out their enemies from houses. In Northern Ireland during the Troubles, Molotov cocktails were used by rioting paramilitary groups and protesters against the police, and they are also used to attack houses, to burn the house, or to intimidate the occupants. In the Arab Spring, including in Cairo, Egypt, pro-government forces attacked protesters in Cairo with Molotovs. In the Bahraini uprising, protesters used Molotov cocktails against security forces. Molotov cocktails were also used by protesters and civilian militia in Ukraine during violent outbreaks of the Euromaidan and the 2014 Ukrainian Revolution. Protesters during the Ferguson riots used Molotov cocktails, while police used smoke bombs and tear gas. In Bangladesh during anti-government protests before the 2014 national election and in the year afterwards, many buses and cars were targeted with petrol bombs. A number of people burned to death and many more were injured. The 3rd of April 1981, Congress activists threw a Molotov cocktail on a public bus near Charu Market, Kolkata, West Bengal, India, killing 7 passengers. Legality. As incendiary devices, Molotov cocktails are illegal to manufacture or possess in many regions. In the United States, Molotov cocktails are considered destructive devices under the National Firearms Act and regulated by the ATF. Gallery. Soviet cluster bomb ironically called a Molotov breadbasket. The Molotov cocktail was the Finns' response, a drink to go with the food. A member of a demolition team from Task Force Alpha, 2nd Marine Division, displays a Molotov cocktail that failed to work during the Persian Gulf War. An IDF soldier shows materials used to prepare Molotov cocktails, which were found on 2 Palestinian youths near the Huara checkpoint. Molotov cocktails used by protesters in Thailand, May 2010. Molotov cocktails used by anti-government protesters in Kiev, Ukraine on February 18, 2014.